Okay, let's please give a warm welcome to the director-producer, Bing Liu. Dr. Michael Renov, your moderator.
Thank you for being here, Bing.
Thanks for having me.
How many skateboards were destroyed in the making of this film?
I think I lost count.
And I guess one question I have is really about the extent of the filming once you really kind of locked on to the story that you wanted to tell, because there's so much home movie footage, archival footage of various sorts, including childhood. It's a little bit difficult to know what the beginning point is. Once Elliot enters the picture, then we have at least, a yardstick for understanding the passage of time. But it just feels as though with this portrait of your friends and yourself and your family, their family, the city, time becomes a kind of swirl, And so I guess two parts. One is, what was the kind of range of time that you were doing principal photography, and how did you think about time when you started editing?
I'm 29 now. I started making Mind in the Gap in earnest when I was about 24. I set out to make a film about skateboarders' relationships with their fathers, with their childhoods, with themselves. And I went around the country following skateboarders all over the place. And a year into it, that's when I met Kier. And I say met because I didn't really know Kier growing up. He's 7 years younger than me. He saw skate videos that I made. I caught him getting into a fight once, and I didn't realize, his name even. But when I met him when I was in my 20s, I was like, oh my God, this guy's me when I was younger. He had so many unresolved feelings about his race, about his father, and he was just now starting to process it. I was like, I went through that process. And then shortly afterwards, so Zach I knew a little bit better. He's 2 years younger than me. But I didn't know him until I was 17, and we filmed a little bit, and then I moved to Chicago. But when I came back, it was like, oh wait, Zach's about to become a father? Here's a trackable story. And so that's the seed of where Mind in the Gap was planted. And then all the archival footage didn't really enter the editing until the final year, until the final 4 or 5 months actually. That's where I dug up all my old archival tapes that were in my shoebox. Half of them weren't labeled, and the ones that were labeled were Dairy Queen 2009. What does that mean? But it was, it wasn't like looking at every frame. It was like fast forwarding and just looking for mostly faces of me and faces of Zach. And then Kier's archival I sourced from a lot of people that were younger that filmed with Kier when he was, getting older. So, and then I started editing almost as soon as I started shooting. I started cutting together scenes, and then along the way, had an assembly, then a rough cut, and so there's a lot of editing over the years as well.
You talk about moving to Chicago, but those were your college years, right?
Well, I went to community college in Rockford, got my associates, and then I moved to Chicago to go to college, yeah.
And I have met Bing through Kartemquin Films, which is a wonderful organization that started as a collective in 1966. So it's been in existence for 52 years now. And it has become a nonprofit organization that gets support from various sources, is pretty large, and also sponsors young filmmakers. There's a program within Kartemquin that's called Diverse Voices in Documentary. Tell us a little bit about how you, as an English major, I think, at UIC, how did you come together with Kartemquin? How did you become one of those diverse voices in documentary?
It was just it was their second year doing it. They were looking for new applicants, and a friend of mine who I'd met working in a set, because I got a job as a PA when I was 19, and then became a grip, then a camera assistant. A friend of mine who I'd met on set, his wife did outreach for documentaries, and she had heard about this fellowship, and she was like, Bing, you should apply with Mind in the Gap. At the time it wasn't called that. So I applied, I think, with 2 days to spare. I got in, and then the rest is history. I did the fellowship, and afterwards Kartemquin wanted to co-produce it with me. So I was like, yes.
But previous to that, you'd also been shooting other people's films, I take it. Is that so?
Yeah, I mean, around that time, I think I was starting to, I was like camera operating for indie. So I joined the Cinematographers Union when I was 23, and so I worked mostly as a loader, then a second AC, and then a first AC. But along the way, I was, camera operating and shooting more independent films and short films.
But the whole time that you were doing that, were you still kind of gestating this project?
Yeah, this was my baby. I didn't get funding until end of 2016, early 2017. And all along the way, I had support. I had a wonderful producer, Diane. I had Cartemquin to act as a home base. I could go there. They would wipe my tears off the floor every time I got a grant application rejected. I could screen rough cuts there, but yeah, it was I forgot the question, but I'm just remembering back to the rejections.
A lot of tears in this film.
A lot of tears, both behind and in front of the camera.
Yeah. For somebody who got rejected, you sure have gotten a lot of acceptance with this film, though. That must feel good in itself.
Yeah, but a part of me is still like waiting for the rejection to come, like even now.
It's interesting, now that you say that these people who become so central to the project were not part of it in the beginning, that you had some more abstract idea in mind about going across the country, looking at skateboarders, thinking about the relationship to family problems, etc. At what point, and you've said something about this, but at what point did you realize that you had the story for your film in your hometown?
It was more that the characters came first. Kier was so charismatic, and other people around the country had talked about abuse and trauma and family issues, but nobody had really quite this emotional immediacy that Kier had, and also this willingness to just go there and do the work of resolving it. Nobody had that. So it was like, well, I have to follow this person. And with Zach, it was like, it was a trackable story. Things just kept happening. It was really dramatic, and it just never stopped happening. So, and then, I think eventually I had to deal with the environment that they were in, deal with who I was as a filmmaker. That came a little bit after establishing Zach and Kier's stories and getting them off the ground.
So within that time frame that you've just described, when did the scene with filming your mom, was that towards the end of the process, early on? Where was that?
It was right before I went to Denver to film Zach in Denver. It was the seed of choosing to do that, and the seed for a lot of decisions made in the second half of the film was based off of Nina telling me that Zach was being abusive. That led to all sorts of ethical questions that I had to answer. And one way I felt like I could do that was in digging into my own story in a way that showed that I lived through this, I understand that it's complicated, and this gives me more of a right to go there. I'm never going to get the complete right. It's always going to be this tension of access and privacy, especially as it deals with domestic violence. But, it helps. It helps to understand. It helps audiences empathize with my character.
So the domestic violence theme in the beginning was in the back of your mind, but more because of your own experience. Is that fair to say?
I'd say so. It was in the ether of the things that I wanted to explore, but it wasn't like the main thing. I mean, this is a verite film, and the characters' lives lead. And when it led to domestic violence, it's like, oh wow, we have this amazing opportunity to explore it in this very complex way.
I have to giggle a little bit when you say it's a verite film, because you've got your own subject, your character saying, what kind of movie are we making now? Do I talk to you, or do I just pretend you're not there? So he's onto it.
Yeah, it's weird, because when I first started learning about verite, it was when I was working with Cartemquin. It was, I was watching all their films, Hoop Dreams, Interrupters, Stevie, and then other films that aren't like Harlan County. And I always focused on like this idea of fly in the wall, right? That's like common phrase you hear. But then you go back and look at these films further, and it's like, well, no, the camera matters. The camera being there matters, and it plays an integral role in how the story is told. And so I think that's part of verite too.
Well, the films you just mentioned, which are all Steve James films, I guess. And we've had him here at USC. We've been lucky enough to have him here with some of his movies over the years. He certainly does develop intense relationships with his subjects. And I think that's the key, and it's what you have in your film as well, is that there's no way that you can be a fly on the wall because you're too involved. The connection, the engagement that you have with your subjects is such that you're in a relationship. And that relationship is always, I think, pretty obvious to the audience. And I think it's the strength of the film. So I would say you are far from a fly on the wall. And the film is much better for it. Have you had any conversations with other people in the Diverse Voices in Documentary program about, well, since you've had some success, do other people think that they need to make a film like yours?
Not necessarily. There's another filmmaker who was in the cohort before me, the first cohort. She made a film called All the Queen's Horses. It was about one of the biggest embezzlement fraud cases in U.S. history. It happened in a really small town called Dixon, Illinois. I'm talking like 7-8 figures stolen from this mayor of this town of like a few thousand. And it did, she wrote an article that went to the Forbes or something. It was like, I got 57 festival rejections, but now I'm on Netflix 2 years later. There's just so many different ways to get at.
She's a CPA.
And she's a CPA. She's a CPA by training. You know, she had never made a film. She'd never worked in films before. But she was an expert in this issue that she was making the film on. So yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways. And Kartemquin's sort of the poster child for this sort of way of thinking, like, you know, F the gatekeepers, you know, like you can release the film however you want. Can I curse? I don't know if I could curse, but I felt a little like Daryl just
campus.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Go for it.
Right. But yeah, no, I mean, it's like you don't have to let Sundance dictate whether your film reaches your audience or not, you know. I'm glad I went to Sundance, but you don't have to. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Well, when did the ITVS part of this? Because Sally Joe Pfeiffer and other credits that are on there make it clear that you've got an ITVS deal as well. So how did that, if you don't mind talking about that end of it, you have Kartemquin, you have ITVS, now Hulu. How did that evolve?
It was actually POV that was the first money in. It was end of 2016. Shortly afterwards, we got ITVS Open Call, which is the holy grail for independent documentary money. And that was the second time that I applied. I got rejected, I think, a year or two before applying to ITVS the first time. But it was sort of this prophecy that came true that I'd been hearing, which is, you know, once somebody puts their support or money in, all of a sudden other people become interested. And I felt there was something true to that. And then Sundance came in near the like September of last year. They came in with some money. So those were the three main sources. But yeah, I mean, without that, it wouldn't have been possible to make the film, you know, in the way that we did, where it was just this rapid sort of moving this past year, where we hire a composer, sound mix it, hire additional editor, you know.
Talk about the music, please, if you would, because I think it's pretty powerful. And at what point, what did you have in mind, and what was the relationship with, I think 2 people I saw credited for the music.
Yeah, we only hired one, but somehow he was like, well, I'm going to have this guy help me. Well, I mean, I've always seen skateboarding more as a feminine, emotional dance more than this macho, aggressive kickboxing sort of thing. And so the temp music I chose from the beginning was very like melodic, you know, more about internal feelings and the feeling of gliding. In many ways, you know, he didn't sway too far from the temp music that we chose. Some of the pieces are really hard to get. Like that end montage, it was like, you know, cut it very specifically to a piece of temp track, and you know, I think there was some work in getting him to believe in like making it louder than he wanted it to be, you know, because I think he'd been working on films and it was like, you know, we don't want to overdo the music. We don't want to, because that's sort of like the frightening thing about being a director of a documentary. It's like the music is obviously where the director's hand is shown in the most obvious way, you know, and it's scary to be able to like go out there. But I think it just worked so well in the rough cut with the temp track, you know, and making it loud and like sort of above and beyond like the subtlety that we get in the beginning. And people just bought, you know, I feel like at that point we had earned it emotionally. And so, but that was the one that was the cue that took the longest. I mean, it was the last day of mix, you know, it just still wasn't working. I remember like emailing, like, can you just send me the stems? I'm just going to music edit this myself. No, you know, no offense towards your work, but I just, you know, and so that was what it looked like. It was like staying up till 3 a.m, the last day of mix, getting that one right.
It works. And it feels also that the sequence that you end with rhymes with the sequence that you about something from the very beginning of the film as well.
So we talked a lot about sort of thematically keeping in this idea of, you know, themes that keep popping up and building over time. Yeah, so we had a lot of conversations in the months leading up to him actually, you know, putting pen to score a sheet.
I have to ask you just a little bit about shooting on a skateboard.
I don't know why that's funny. I actually wasn't on a board that much. I was running on foot with a glide cam most of it, unless I knew they were gonna go like, you know, skid across a bridge. It's like I'm not gonna run a quarter mile. But it's actually more limiting to be on a board than it was on foot, because you're just, you know, on foot I can go over stairs, through gravel, go around them in, you know, weird ways. But on a skateboard you're just sort of limited to pushing, turning left and right.
How good is Elliot on a board these days?
He's actually taken more to like that, you know, those like training bike things that don't have pedals. They're just sort of, you know, they Flintstone kick. Like that's sort of what he's doing right now.
But his balance looks like it's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, he's got a couple of generations of something that's been handed down. So
yeah. I'm sure that there are questions in the audience, and so I want to be able to give some time to that. Anybody have anything to ask? Yes.
Yeah, you touched a little bit on the idea of like access and privacy, and like that really struck me watching this was, if I was filming it, there would have been so many times where I would have been like, okay, I should just probably stop filming, or like I would feel really uncomfortable filming. But really it was those moments that ended up like making the film, or at least taking it kind of that next far. And I know you could, like, while you're shooting, you can reconcile if this is for the higher purpose, which is the movie, but I'm sure at the time it was probably really hard to keep filming at some point, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts, like, during that.
there were certain things that I feel like, you know, weren't first for me in terms of thematically talking about a topic, you know? I feel like in my teenage years, I'd spent a lot of time with close friends, just talking until the wee hours of the night about just things we were going through. You know, I think certain characters in this film like didn't really. It was a first time talking to them, so it was more awkward for them. But I feel like I just like had to jump off the cliff and just hold on to the moments. I think. I mean, there was a lot of times where I did feel like really like when Zach and Nina were like having this verbal argument. I'm like, they haven't said anything yet, you know. But we had a lot of conversations both on and off camera about, you know, this idea of their participation in the film, their power, their say. We told them a couple years before finishing the film, look, we're going to show you the film before we release it. We're going to show you the film before we finish it. Not to give you, you know, creative control, but we just don't want to misrepresent you. We want to hear what you have to say. And then along the way, there's a lot of conversations about, you know, how do you feel about being in the film? And like at one point I told Nina, like, how do you feel about being a main character now? And she was like, I didn't realize I was a main character. This is after, you know, like heavily following her. So I think conversations like that just sort of both to check in and to remind them that, hey, you can tell me how you feel about everything we're capturing.
Following up just a little bit on that, the intimacy that you have with your characters, it's a little surprising to hear that you hadn't known Keir for very long, because it seems like there's such a bond. The question is really about your framing, because there's some very intense close-ups that you choose, and it seems like it's pretty consistent with the strong connection that you have with them. Is that just an instinctive thing for you to really get in that tight?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, part of it was I was doing my own sound. I was a one-person crew. You know, I had a lav on them, but I wanted to get I had an onboard on the camera, so I can get past like 5 or 6 feet without worrying about sound. But yeah, I think it also helps to be, you know, to have your face close to theirs. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think I didn't really. Yeah, I guess like now that I think about it, yeah, it's like there was very few moments where I was beyond 5 or 6 feet away from them.
If you didn't know people, it would be hard to film in that way, wouldn't it?
I remember when I first, so I had a 24 to 70 and a 16 to 35 for most of filming, and then at one point I got a 70 to 200. You know, I saved a bunch of money and spent like $2,000 on this lens. Like, I want to try it out, but it just didn't. It felt so. I had to be so far away, and I only used it once.
The film reminds me a little bit of a film that came out in the very early 80s called 17. It was made by Joel DeMott and Jeff Kreines, kind of a direct cinema thing. And they believed strongly, never get more than 18 inches away from your subjects. And it was male-female pair, and he would shoot the guys, she would shoot the girls. They were in high school. And they felt strongly that that was the key, that was the sort of formula for getting close and being accepted, because they weren't friends. They were, you know, but they spent a year doing the film and really advocated that kind of intensity. It feels like you kind of picked up on that in your own way. I know there were more questions. Yes?
Congratulations. As a Chicagoan who was an English major at Illinois and Champaign and taught south of Rockford in Rochelle, I'm wondering where you live now and what you're doing next.
I live in Chicago. Currently I'm working in a film that we started filming a few months ago. It's about the way that we access memory when it's buried beneath trauma and how difficult it is, both personal and communal memory, as it pertains to young men who experience gun violence in Chicago. Yeah.
Lots of material.
Yeah, lots of material. I mean, it's a character-driven, you know, but we do have a broader arc along with that too.
Do you think you'll stay connected with Cartemquin?
I think so. Yeah. I don't see how I couldn't. Yeah. I mean, we're releasing a film together right now, like with Hulu. Yeah.
And it's a big enough organization. I guess you don't. You know, there's plenty of room to move inside of it.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing quite like. It's hard to describe. It's not a production company.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a family. It really is.
Other questions for Bing? Yes.
I'm wondering how Zach and Keir felt about seeing themselves portrayed this way.
So Zach. So when we showed Zach the film, that was probably the most nerve-wracking for me because I didn't, you know, I just didn't know what he would think. There was a fear in me, I think, that he was gonna turn to me in the middle of the film and just punch me in the face or something, you know. But he did. But when the credits rolled, I couldn't look at him the whole. But when the credits rolled, I looked over and he was crying. It was the second time I'd ever seen him cry. And he told me he was relieved because he thought he was going to get portrayed worse, which I think says a lot about how he feels about himself.
It's in the film, got it.
Yeah. And then but like since then he's been a lot more emotional. Oh, this is interesting. Someone liked him so much in the film, his charisma, that they want to cast him for a fiction film. And so they reached out to him, and they reached out to me, and I was like, sure. I mean, I'll talk to him. And Zach was like, yeah, I'm down. And then they drove out to Rockford to do a script read with him. He ended up beating out all these professional actors. It's a SAG movie. He's getting paid, for 2 months of being this lead role. German production, this Danish director's second film. He plays this lead. He plays this father who's having these emotional issues. So he's having these family issues as well with his wife and kids, And it's like, it's not mumblecore, but it's like, it's not fully scripted. There's a lot of improv. And I visited him recently, and he was like, it's kind of like skateboarding in that you take like an hour to film one usable clip. but it's a lot more emotionally exhausting. And he was talking about like drawing from his own life. You know, there's this scene where like his two kids are sleeping in the room, and he has this gun in his lap. And he's thinking about killing himself, and he like thought back to like when he ran away to Denver and like was really going through this dark time. But then he said it felt nice to express himself within the confines of this character, so it's like therapeutic for him. And then, so when Kier saw the film, it was like every time he laughed on screen, he'd laugh in person. Every time he cried on screen, he'd cry in person. Nina probably took it the hardest because when she saw it, she relived the relationship. She remembered Zach's charisma, why she loved him in the first place, and then she was hurt again by him, you know, not being the person that she thought he was going to be. And so, you know, she in hindsight, it's like she had compartmentalized that relationship and hadn't dealt with it. And so, you know, we had a long conversation with her afterwards. Since then, she's come out to screenings, and I think there's this one screening at a college, and there's this domestic violence shelter that had a booth set up, and they drew a lot of people in their community out. There were all these women that opened up to her about, you know, how she's so young to have experienced this and to be brave enough to be in the film, and to have, you know, reached this point at the end where she's like, well, no, I've just been a person for other people all my life, you know, and they're really proud of her. And it was like, I could just like see in Nina's face that she was realizing, you know, her story was bigger than her own.
So really, it does turn out to be therapy for everyone, doesn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Yes.
So, did you ever go through formal therapy, or was filmmaking something that's, well, obviously it's therapeutic, but I mean, I feel like you must have learned a lot about yourself in making this, and I just want to hear, I guess, your thought process.
I think therapy is, so there's a lot of stuff that happens in life, you know, that, like you're just getting hit with all these things, whether it's school, life, work, family. I think therapy is being able to focus in on things that are unresolved in a vacuum. I felt like I was doing that for everyone in the film. No one was doing that for me, you know, like no one was pressing me to sort of confront these things. Even me going to interview with my mom, you know, no one was like really like, confronting me to reflect on it in this vacuum. That being said, I feel like I did a lot of work outside of the film. I started seeing a therapist in 2016. I showed her a rough cut, and it sort of short-circuited our work together. It like made her understand. And she came out to the Chicago premiere. I don't know if that crossed some sort of ethical line, but yeah, no, I did.
Did you make her pay just the way?
Exactly. Right. Yes, revenge, $10 ticket. Yeah, no, there's a lot of work done outside the film. I took a 40-hour domestic violence course while making the film as well. Yeah, and I'm going to be processing and learning, I think, for the rest of my life.
Wow. Thank you again so much for being with us. This is a great film, and it looks like you're on to bigger and better things. So congratulations and keep it up.
Thanks so much, everyone.